Добро вечер и добро дојдовте во 24 анализа. Актуелната политичка криза и евроинтеграциите на Македонија. На овие теми вечерва разговараме со британскиот амбасадор во Република Македонија, господинот Чарлз Герет. Ambassador, good evening and welcome to 24 News.
Good evening, it's a pleasure to be here.
So I just announced that we're going to be talking about the political crisis. The process, it would seem, is still alive since there are future negotiations scheduled in the following days. However, is there any visible progress, to the best of your knowledge, from the aspect of an observer of this entire situation?
Well, I think it's always disappointing when the latest round closes without the announcement that agreement has been reached. But I think it's a very good thing that the conversation continues. It's a very complex set of issues that are being discussed between the sides in those talks. And as long as they're going on, there is hope for a positive outcome. In terms of the specifics, obviously one can't go into details about that, but I think that the key thing is to focus on the next step.
So I would be shooting the moon if I ask what is going on in those rooms and those meetings.
You'd be shooting the moon, yes, you would be. But I think that that it's important to say that, as we've said, as ambassadors, perhaps most notably when the 6 ambassadors made a joint message some 5 or 6 weeks ago, all sides in this have a role to play, a very serious, responsible role to play. The government, in terms of looking into the allegations that have been raised during the course of the political crisis. The opposition to engage responsibly and constructively with the government in the search for a solution. The institutions of the country also have a role to play, not necessarily in those talks, of course, but in the wider question of how you resolve this political crisis. And I would say also the citizens of the country have a role to play as well. This is a very, very serious chapter in their country's history, and one that individual citizens have a responsibility to engage in and debate and understand.
6 weeks ago, you and your colleagues presented the government with certain remarks that in one or the other form have been repeated through international reports, Brussels experts reports, etc. Basically a guideline to how to improve rule of law and democratic processes. Do you have any information that certain measures are being taken in addressing these issues that you pointed out?
Well, I think whenever the question of reports about Macedonia's reform process come up, I always think that it must be confusing to a lot of people. There are so many of these reports which cover so many complex and often quite obscure issues that it's sometimes difficult to know what to make of them. The most recent one of relevance to Macedonia's situation is the so-called Priba report, which came out of the visit to Macedonia, several visits to Macedonia by a team of experts from the European Union. And that is a very important document, I think. It's slightly different from a lot of the other reports, not in terms of how it is focused, more in terms of the detail it goes into and the directness with which it presents things. And I think as such it presents a great opportunity for the country to really get to grips with the kind of things that are holding it back in terms of developing its democracy, developing its rule of law, and moving forward on the Euro-Atlantic path. So I think the Priba report is something which the country as a whole and the institutions, politicians, leaders, individuals need to focus on and really get to grips with.
The Priba report has been subject to criticism after it was published. Certain analysts call it a legal scandal. Now, is this a problem?
Well, I don't see why it should be a problem, actually. The Priba report is, if you like, a classic report from a set of critical friends. By critical friends, I mean friends of Macedonia who genuinely want Macedonia to move forward, but are not simply going to give the good news to Macedonia. They're going to tell Macedonia or suggest to Macedonia what is going wrong, how best to approach it, and so on. So it's a constructive report. It's not meant in any other way than that. A constructive report which can be used by anyone who needs to use it in order to move Macedonia towards a better place.
The Priebus report notes that Macedonia does not have problems with laws as such, but it has a problem in terms of implementation. And now we're discussing implementation of reforms that are supposed to improve Macedonia's situation. Now, is this a remark ultimately proving that we have a report? Some call it a legal scandal, some say it's a good pathway. Is implementation still going to be a problem? Based on previous experience, of course.
Well, I think implementation is always a huge challenge for accession states. You know, it's relatively easy to write a law. Okay, you need lawyers who understand the issues. You need lawyers who understand how to frame things in the right language. And then, of course, you need a parliament to debate it and put that into place. But once it's in place, it doesn't actually change anything. The real challenge is around implementation. It always has been in accession, and that requires cultural change, requires people to change the way they behave. Leaders, other politicians, institutions, individuals, media, you name it, everyone has to change their behaviour, and that's a real challenge, and it's one where leadership and collaboration and openness do help, but it's never an easy ask.
The governmental reaction to the Priebus report and the State Department report on human rights has been a plan for Macedonian EU accession. However, do you see any specific steps, any specific tasks being undertaken in order to address the issues that have been underlined? Or is it too early to talk about action?
It's very early days yet, actually. I know that the Deputy Prime Minister, Fatmir Besimi, has presented an action plan based on that, and I think that's a very welcome, very constructive step forward. It's very important, of course, that any action plan that describes what the government and the wider institutions in the country are going to do in response to the Priebus report mirrors the Priebus report in its entirety. The Priebus report is not a menu that can be taken from. It's an honest assessment of everything in those areas that needs addressing, and so we would hope that that action that flows from it will be comprehensive.
The action plan we mentioned and a strategy has been placed on the table during the negotiations. Can this promise of action be used as a bargaining chip in the negotiations at this point?
Well, I don't see how it can be used as a bargaining chip. I mean, I think the negotiations will inevitably include a number of conversations about aspects of how you move forward, but I think to call it a bargaining chip is putting too much weight on it.
Commissioner Hahn was not present at the negotiations, leaving the leaders, basically, with the help of your colleagues and the diplomatic corps, to discuss a solution about the crisis by themselves. Now, this is creating an impression that the EU is stepping aside from the entire process and is losing interest. Is there any truth to this perception?
None at all, no. I mean, the European Commission and the European Union's member states are all absolutely firmly on side with Macedonia in this. You know, I mean, the impression, all sorts of impressions might be drawn, but I mean, in the case of Commissioner Hahn, you know, I mean, he is the very most appropriate person to be involved in this sort of thing, given his position as Commissioner with responsibility for enlargement, given his understanding of the issues, but B, also an extremely busy man with many other things on his plate as well. So, I mean, it's completely understandable that he won't be able to attend every session of the talks that goes on either here or in Brussels or in Strasbourg. But he has been involved, very closely, personally involved, and I'm sure will continue to be in future.
So, in terms of Commissioner Hahn, since we mentioned him, there's been a lot of speculation around his objectivity, around his impartiality. The Weekly Focus has published this in an article that claims that Commissioner Hahn has certain interest in the Skopje 2014 project, for an example. Can such reports damage the process?
I've seen quite a bit of noise about that on social media and heard a number of rumours about it, but I've not yet seen anything which suggests any concrete reason for concern about it. And I go back to what I was saying earlier. I mean, there is no one really who is better suited to the role of that leadership in mediation than Commissioner Hahn. He's absolutely the right man for the job.
Victoria Nuland is visiting Macedonia and the region in what is announced as a routine visit every year. Now, this has also created speculation that the negotiation table might be complemented by a representative of the United States. Is this, well, again, I'm going to have to ask, is there any truth to this?
Well, I mean, I mean, it's speculation, and for the answer from the heart, you'd have to ask Victoria Nuland about it. But I think that it's no surprise that Victoria Nuland's coming to Macedonia. I mean, the United States has an interest which is in Macedonia, which is every bit as close as EU member states, arguably, and the Commission, and so it's no surprise that a senior US diplomat will be coming here to see for herself what's going on.
MEP Weigel, in an interview for 24 News, has stated that basically that the crisis could have implications to regional stability. Are things that bad?
Well, I think it's, in itself, it's a truism. If a country is going through a political crisis, it is, by definition, not as stable as if it was going through a period of non-political crisis. And given the way that the region is so interconnected, in some respects, especially ethnically and in terms of passage of people and so on, it would be foolish not to take account of the fact that there might be regional implications for it. That said, I think that there is a lot to be optimistic about in terms of regional stability. The Kumanovo incident, for example, a tragic and awful incident, raised a lot of fears about the reawakening of interethnic problems and interregional instability. But at the end of the day, however awful and tragic that incident was, it didn't spark anything particularly beyond the borders of the incident itself.
Kumanovo left a lot of fog in the public. Again, a lot of speculation, again, a lot of research as to how did this happen. And I guess the primary thing is how did, I believe it was 40 people, or, well, a group full of people with 2 vehicles cross the border and no one noticed. Are we having a political crisis that is causing the institutions to work inefficiently, or are the two things completely unrelated?
No, I don't think the political crisis is causing institutions in that sense to operate inefficiently. I mean, I think if any country's border service were to be aware of every movement of every person over every border, then it would probably be putting too many resources into the border service. So I mean, I'm not necessarily surprised by that. I mean, you refer to fog around the Kumanovo incident, and
there's been a lot of speculation that that key figures, power holders, politicians have been involved into this whole incident, and there's been some wiretap conversations recorded conversations that have been presented. Clearly, a lot of hustle around this.
Yes, but I think the vast majority of it is speculation, and I think the point I would make is that whenever an incident as tragic and awful as Kumanovo happens, I think there's a responsibility to examine what happened, what went wrong, and how things could be done better by any institution that's involved in any way in that kind of incident. To take a thoroughly transparent and rigorous approach to understanding that, so the lessons can be learnt for next time. When that kind of process happens, it puts more hard facts on the table, and it naturally allows people to draw more constructive conclusions about what went on. And it also diminishes the scope for speculation and rumour to gain currency. So I think there's a real need for that kind of response.
We've touched upon interethnic relations. The opposition claims it has materials regarding the Smilkovo Lake incident. Now, that is very sensitive, as I remember that a group trashed the government after the incident itself. There was a lot of tension during the trials, protests and everything, and now the opposition has a so-called bomb regarding this incident, and it's keeping it, saying we're going to give a couple of days to the negotiations and then we're going to go radical with the measures. How do you view this situation? Is this too risky in such a situation, especially even in line with the Kumano incident?
Yeah, I mean, there have been rumours that I've heard since about the time the bombs started falling back in early February, that there was something really quite dramatic on that front. Again, you know, I mean, I don't know the black and white answer to that, what is held within the wiretap material. That said, the opposition have also made it clear that, you know, when the time is right, by which I take to understand that, you know, that they have confidence in the process, they will put this material into the hands of the appropriate institutions to work through. And that, of course, is absolutely the right way to get a proper, thorough, meaningful and transparent investigation of what's going on.
This whole situation in Macedonia is opening quite a few prospects around responsibility. On one hand, we have disclosures that implicate government officials, accuse them of corruption. And on the other hand, we have the opposition that holds recorded conversations allegedly by domestic or foreign services that hasn't been detailedly confirmed yet. When it comes to responsibility, is there enough sensitivity, not only from the government, but from the opposition as well?
Well, I would say this, that, you know, the messages that we gave as 6 ambassadors sort of 5 or 6 weeks ago, which focused on all sides needing to show responsibility, are still current. I think that, you know, in any situation of political disagreement or political crisis or political argument, whatever it is, these situations are always best resolved when people take responsibility and understand that, you know, that is ultimately in the best interests of the country, of the people, and therefore probably of themselves as well. It's a piece that I think often bears restating, that government and opposition and institutions are the servants of the people. You know, the people are the taxpayers. The people of this country are the ones who ultimately stand to gain or lose by the behaviour of politicians. And that's why it's important for them to take responsibility.
When it comes to responsibility and to wiretapping in general, I'm just reminded of the Gordon Brown incident in April 2010. Forgot his microphone on, came into his car, called a woman being bigoted, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Didn't go so well for him. And now we have something that of much larger scales. So if I forget my microphone and talk after the show, I'm probably going to lose my job. But then again, I don't run the country. Are we talking political responsibility or legal responsibility? Because so far, during the disclosures, we've been focusing on legal responsibility. What about the political responsibility of leaders?
Well, I mean, you know, there are dozens of examples, especially with the internet now. You can just Google, you know, sort of country leader goof, and you'll get, you know, hundreds of these things from sort of North America to Europe to Asia, and they're very amusing, of course. But I think that, you know, the distinction you draw is an important one between the legal responsibility and the political responsibility, because of course the two are related, and here you've got issues which are far more important than just calling someone a bigoted woman from a car. You know, I mean, these are concerns which go absolutely to the heart of the country's rule of law, of its democracy, of responsibility to the people, and they need to be properly investigated. These, so that's the legal track, and it's something which really needs to be taken forward.
And what about the political track?
Well, the political track follows from that in a sense, because, you know, once you've got the legal facts on the table, the political consequences can be drawn.
The Privé report recommends that during the investigation, the independent investigation that is to be conducted by around the wiretapping scandal, there might be a need to take the recordings from the secret services in Macedonia and compare them to the disclosures. Do you think that we're ready to do this?
Well, I mean, it's not really for me to say sitting in this studio. I think, you know, experts on this subject, you know, need to be brought together as a team.
Would that be an easy thing to do regarding taking materials from the Secret Service? I imagine that in any country that would be a scandal, to disclose materials that allegedly the Secret Service holds.
Well, I think, you know, I mean, none of these things are going to be easy to do. I mean, what's been apparently revealed by these wiretap recordings are very, very sensitive issues. But at the same time, you know, they're sensitive because they're important to the country. So if you're going to deal with them properly to the benefit of the country and the country's citizens, then you have to grasp these nettles. They require difficult decisions. They're very painful. It's not. I mean, it's not just Macedonia that faces this kind of issue. You know, these kind of issues are faced, you know, day in, day out in other countries around the world, and there are many examples of you know, failure to take difficult decisions which lead to worse situations, and you know, the brave ability to take these difficult decisions which leads to a better place.
From secret services to dark forces, the Prime Minister has been pointing the finger at different parties in regard to these disclosures. And there's an active judicial process in which people have been accused of cooperating with secret services. Do you feel like you're representing a country that has a secret service wiretapping Macedonian citizens? Because this is generally addressed to, you could just take a guess at who it is.
No, I don't feel like that, because I know it's not the case. But actually, in this regard, I welcome the Prime Minister's comments some 5 weeks ago on this question, where he dismissed speculation that, in fact, I mean, the two major rumours, the two major pieces of speculation about foreign involvement in Kumanovo and foreign intelligence services being behind the wiretappings, he dismissed both of them, and so I have no problem with that, and I welcome those comments.
But he was the one stating them to begin with.
Right, but I mean, you know, he's put the record, he's made the record clear.
Oh, of course. I guess right now it's a good time to take a short break for commercials, and we're just going to continue with the show afterwards. 24 Анализа вечер разговаряме со амбасадорот на Обединетото кралство во Република Македонија Чарлз Герет. Ambassador, we've touched upon the Priba report, the so-called opposition bombs, etc., and concluded that an independent investigation, as recommended by the Priba report, is in order. So, would I be wrong to summarize that the report from Brussels and all the other reports coming in Macedonia are a good path, a good pointer to what needs to be done in order to improve the situation in the country? Absolutely right. I mean, you know, as we were saying earlier, I mean, these reports are objective statements, if you like, or assessments from critical friends of what the situation in Macedonia is. They're meant absolutely in good faith as something that Macedonia can use to help it along the path towards democratization, building the rule of law, and the various other areas that are important for membership of Euro-Atlantic institutions. There has been a bit of a debate around this, because the European Commission in its reports has noted that the independence of the judiciary in Macedonia is questionable because of government influences, administrations being used for party purposes, etc. And now we're expecting these same institutions to conduct an independent investigation, and this has been pointed out many times. Is this a test for Macedonian institutions to see if they're capable, and is there a contingency plan if they fail? No, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a deliberate test for Macedonia in that sense, at least not a test that's being set by anyone from outside. But it's certainly a challenge for Macedonia. But going into that challenge, I mean, it's important to remember that within these institutions, like the judiciary, there are, of course, alongside things which are going wrong, a lot of things which are going absolutely right. There are some absolutely fantastic professional people within the judiciary in Macedonia. And the real sort of point is to try and focus on encouraging them as well as addressing the things that are going wrong. Judiciary is a fantastically important bit of the overall picture.
I like to regard it as one of a small number of foundation stones of a democratic, fair, prosperous society. And we're celebrating this year in the UK the 800th anniversary of the sealing of the Magna Carta, which was a document which was sealed so long ago, not even signed, it was sealed by our king, King John, in 1215, as a way of, for the barons to keep his power in check. And it's from that document that modern British law, and in fact judicial systems around the world, derive these concepts like the fact that no one person, no ruler can be above the law, like the concept of habeas corpus, in which you cannot be held against your will without good legal reason for it, and a number of other very important judicial concepts. So this year is a very important one for us. It's 800 years that we've been developing this system, and I think that we can all draw strength from that kind of experience to strengthen institutions like the judiciary in Macedonia.
But we don't have 800 years of judicial tradition.
No, but that's your privilege, you see. I mean, I've often heard the comment since I came to Macedonia that Macedonia is a very young country. It's only 24 years on from independence. How can you possibly expect us to have a fully functioning independent judiciary? And my response, which is only slightly unfair, is that you only have to look at what happened between 1945 and 1969 in Germany. Germany in 1945 was ruled by the Nazi Party and Hitler. In 1969, it was the envy of Europe. It was a successful, fair society with an independent, well-functioning judiciary. It had a very powerful economy. It was doing everything right. I mean, if Germany can do it out of the ruins of the Second World War, Macedonia should be able to do it with all the support that's available to it from elsewhere in Europe.
When it comes to support, there's one issue. First thing regarding the judiciary. So you're saying self-regulation of the judiciary is the way to squeeze out influence? Is that what the reports and the bottom line of this whole process should be?
I think it's probably wider than that, actually. I mean, I think self-regulation is very important, but for any system really to prosper, it requires anyone who has or could have some sort of influence over it to live up to their responsibilities as leaders. And this applies not just to politicians, it applies to anyone with any power within a country. I mean, a very common debate in the United Kingdom is the influence that powerful commercial interests can have, not just over the judiciary, but over other institutions of democracy like the media as well. And that's a very relevant argument. So it's a wide range of people who need to live up to their responsibilities and understand what the consequences of their actions are for democracy and fairness in a country.
The power over media in Macedonia, allegedly, is governmental influence, since statistics show that it is spending a lot of money on advertising in certain media. And there's numbers to prove that point, something that, according to the latest recommendations, is not going to be very possible now. However, when it comes to media freedom, is that something that can be regulated with a certain regulation that's going to be posted from recommendations from a foreign organization, from either the EU or the United States, or is that something that the media themselves need to fight for?
Well, I'm very glad you've raised media, because it's another one of my foundation stones of democracy and a fair society. I mean, it really is a very important area. But I think it's worth taking a step back from all the noise that there is around media in Macedonia. It strikes me that just as in most countries around the world, the media here faces a number of problems which are essentially commercial problems as a background to their operating environment.
Small market, lots of outlets.
Absolutely right. I mean, we have these challenges in the UK as well, but that's a country with 30 times the population, with the massive advantage of having English as a mother tongue, so we can tap readily into markets around the world for our media products, and yet, despite those advantages, we face these commercial pressures. Macedonia's a tiny market with its own language, or languages, I should say, and facing real commercial difficulty over these things. Against that background, though, I would say that it kind of increases the responsibility for those who can lean on the media to influence the media in some way, to take account of what they're doing, because it can have a disproportionately powerful negative impact on the proper functioning of democracy.
When it comes to, well, I would say this is a democratic thing because state money is being poured into certain media outlets, but to look at the entire situation, just as an observer, it turns out that every fourth Macedonian, according to latest statistics, is living in poverty, and yet the government has spent millions to convince Macedonians and people of Macedonia to eat to have a balanced diet, to eat healthy. Now, is this something that could pass as easily, say, in a democratic society of a European country?
Well, I mean,
without fierce reaction, I would say.
I'm not going to try and second guess the decisions of the responsible ministries here in Macedonia about these things. Suffice to say that we have similar arguments about government decisions in the United Kingdom on spending money. Some people agree with them, some people disagree with them. But I think the important point is one of principle here, and that is about how government money is used in terms of propping up or how it's channeled to particular parts of the media. And I think that's a very real question. It's a very important one to address. It's one that's picked up in a number of the reports we were talking about earlier, and so one that really does need to be addressed.
Looking at the media issue, it would turn out that if the media business would be sustainable, the market would need to finance a certain number of media, and it can finance more. Now we have a lot of outlets and very little income from the private sector, according to latest numbers. Would this mean that the solution to the media problem in Macedonia is closing certain outlets?
Look, I mean, those are commercial questions, which I'm really not qualified to talk about. I mean,
I'm asking because usually the recommendations around freedom of media come from the international community.
Right.
And the effect from all of that would be, well, the government's not going to be advertising anymore, certain advertisers pick out certain media, some are left unfinanced, close them.
Right. I mean, I think one needs just to strip apart the two areas of challenge, broad challenge for the media, one on the commercial side, one in terms of sort of political or other influence on the media. The commercial side is something which, I mean, I don't have an opinion on. These are commercial decisions. I do understand that the operating environment is extremely difficult, and that's something that presents a major challenge to individual businesses in the sector in Macedonia, just as it does elsewhere. The political side is one where we have more control over our actions as leaders, and one where governments and indeed other institutions in any country, in the UK just as much as in Macedonia, have a responsibility to live up to, have a responsibility not to unduly influence the media.
So rule of law, democratic processes, as well as judiciary, media, we've touched upon all these issues. When you ask an average person about the European Union, one would get the impression that it is a union, it is a community where stable countries who can firmly address their interior affairs issues capably and stably engage in forming policies for the greater good, for international policies or even address global issues. And then there's us. Some would argue that we cannot organize a drinking party in the Skopje brewery without international mediation. Regardless of whether we're going to keep or lose the negotiation recommendation, are we leaving the impression that we're capable to be a part of a bigger family?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I'm a complete optimist on this front. I know the current situation is difficult, but Macedonia has a destiny within the European Union and within NATO. I have absolutely no doubt about that. And I also have no doubt that ultimately the reform path, you will negotiate the reform path. It's a difficult path to negotiate, but you will do it because the logic is so powerful in that direction. But I recognise that reform is tough. I've been involved over the years in enlargement or the accession process for a number of Central and Eastern European countries, and you're hardly the first candidate state to find these reforms difficult or to question your ability to get there in the end. Plenty of others have done that too. And the results are there to be seen. Eventually, even the country that finds it most difficult gets there and achieves that objective. The international community is there to help. We recognise that the reforms are difficult and that they require difficult decisions, often painful change actually, which is often opposed by people within a country. It's difficult to show the political leadership for that at times. But we're there to help. That's the role of a critical friend, to point out when things are going wrong, to support so that things can be done correctly, and to encourage where necessary. And we do that both as an individual member state, the United Kingdom, but also, of course, as a community with the Commission involvement here as well.
Enlargement is not going to happen within the next 5 years. And there's been a lot of speculation as to why, whether it's fatigue from enlargement or whether none of the candidate countries can possibly fulfill the criteria before that period of time. Is there a risk that we might get too comfortable? Oh, we have 5 years to make reforms, there's enough time. Could this be a risk factor in Macedonia? What is to keep the country motivated to conduct the reforms if Europe says we're not going to enlarge in the next 5 years?
Well, I wouldn't read too much into that specific comment about the timing of enlargement, because I think it's an absolute no-brainer. No countries currently on the path towards EU membership are going to join within 5 years. It just won't happen. I think the much more realistic and arguably much greater problem comes from the question of the unresolved name issue between Skopje and Athens. Which is something that the focus has been slightly taken off in the course of the political crisis over the last 6 months, but it will still be there when the political crisis eventually is resolved, and that is something which really needs to be addressed with a lot of energy actually, because that is essentially holding the country back from making the kind of forward movement that encourages the country and energizes it and helps to cope with the process of reform.
Carrot and cane philosophy in enlargement, in motivating candidate countries to conduct reforms. And we have a recommendation to start negotiations that hasn't come true in quite a while.
Yeah.
Now, are we getting the carrot or the cane when it comes to start of negotiations? A very general question, I apologize. So, is the start of negotiations, the recommendation to start negotiations, is it used as a precondition to solve the political crisis, for an example? It's sort of like a threat. If that doesn't happen, you're going to lose your recommendation. Because that's how it's been presented in the public.
Well, I don't think so. I think the question of the recommendation is really one about whether the country is ready to open negotiations. So that's something which will be assessed over the course of the summer, with a decision made at some stage before the announcement, the publication of it in the autumn. So it's, in a sense, it's neither stick nor. Sorry, carrot or cane, I think is the expression you used. Yeah,
a stick. We can go with stick. There's been information from the Council of Ministers meeting, and that was this is unofficial information that we're getting from Strasbourg, is that there's been a bit of a difference of opinion during the discussion around Macedonia's the conclusions around Macedonia.
Right.
So the first one being with, I believe it was one group of countries that claimed that the recommendation for starting negotiations should stay. And another group of countries mentioned United Kingdom and the Netherlands, saying we cannot conclude that Macedonia has a dedication to Euro integration processes because some of the democratic principles in the country are questionable. So initially I would ask you for comment, is this, because this is off-record information, basically unofficial, is there such a view of the country in the international community?
I mean, it won't surprise you to hear that the conversations that go on behind the process within the European Union are very complex and very long, and involve a lot of very difficult debate, none of which gets presented publicly in a black and white way, but it finds its expression in the conclusions, for example, and those are the words that really matter, if you like. The conclusions that came out of the Council earlier this month were, I think, fairly clear. They were a very clear expression of all European Union member states' concern about the situation in Macedonia. And for those of you who are really into their sort of EU detail, I draw your attention to paragraph 4, which again makes it very clear what needs to go on in order to move Macedonia to a better place. And that is to focus on making the agreement that was reached on the 2nd of June between the leaders, making that reality and putting it in place. Acting on the recommendations that the ODIHR report came up with after the elections last year. And the third point, a thorough and transparent investigation of the allegations that are on the table.
Is the 2nd of June agreement still alive? Is it still possible to achieve the recommendations from the 2nd of June agreement up to the point of early elections in April, after yesterday's outcome as it was? Absolutely,
absolutely. I mean, yesterday's outcome was not full and final. It was essentially, you know, the latest step towards achieving that goal.
Is there a deadline to which point the leaders need to reach a decision before, so that the 2nd of June agreement could actually come true?
I don't think it helps to put deadlines on that kind of thing.
Because there's been a lot of talk about those deadlines. It's like, if they don't do it now on Monday, so yesterday, then the 2nd of June agreement has failed, we won't be able to organize early elections, etc., etc.
Yeah, I mean, the way I prefer to see it is not putting deadlines on it, because I think that doesn't necessarily help the process of finding agreement. I prefer to put the emphasis on encouraging everyone involved in that process to live up to the responsibilities that they have as political leaders, as representatives of the people. And I come back to that point again, you know, political leaders are servants of the people, and that is the responsibility. That is where they owe their duty. And if they can't live up to that responsibility, they're not serving the people of Macedonia.
And my final question, just to wrap things up, is it possible, do we have enough time to achieve these recommendations before the early elections? Some say there's not enough time to organize early elections because we don't have a valid census for years, and clean out the voters list, so revise the voters list. Do we have enough time before April?
Well, there's no denying that the timetable is short. But if all leaders do live up to their responsibilities and everyone pulls together, I have no doubt that tremendous progress can be made.
Ambassador, thank you very much for being a guest at 24 News. Hope to have another interview soon.
Thank you very much.
Вам, почитувани, ви благодарам за вниманието и приятна вечер. Останете со програмата на 24 вести.